I'm Madison Harper, 32, and 3 weeks ago I received a text that completely shattered my world. Sorry, sweetheart, we're keeping the family retreat small this year. No space for you. Maybe next summer. This wasn't the first time. For 3 straight years, I'd gotten the same crushing message. But this time I discovered something that changed everything. Before I tell you what I found out and what I did about it, drop a comment letting me know if you've ever felt like the forgotten family member. Trust me, if you've ever been the black sheep, you need to see how this ends. 6 hours after receiving that text, I was mindlessly scrolling through Instagram when my brother Tyler's post stopped me cold. There it was, a printed guest schedule for the intimate family retreat. At the top, in bold letters, 127 confirmed guests. 127 people. And somehow, there still wasn't space for one more. Let me take you back to where this all began, because understanding my family means understanding why this exclusion cuts so deep. The Harper family retreat wasn't just any vacation. It was our sacred tradition, started by my beloved grandparents, Sarah and William Harper, almost 4 decades ago. Grandpa Will would tell his kids about how he and Grandma Sarah discovered Hidden Cove Lake during their 1985 anniversary trip. "This place has magic," he'd say, his eyes twinkling as he watched us children play by the water's edge. "They bought the lakefront property when I was 7, and those summers became the heartbeat of our family. I can still hear the sound of 8. Cousins racing down to the private dock every morning, our laughter echoing across the crystal clear water. My oldest brother Jake would organize elaborate treasure hunts through the pine forest, while my sisters Emma and Hannah helped Grandma Sarah prepare feasts that could feed an army. The twins, Tyler and Trevor, were always the daredevils, jumping off the highest rocks despite our parents' protests. My youngest sister Chloe was Grandpa's little shadow, following him everywhere as he tended to his vegetable garden and fixed things around the property. But it was me, awkward, artistic Madison, who Grandpa Will would take on special discovery walks around the lake. He noticed my love for sketching before anyone else did. "You see beauty differently, Madison," he'd say, as I drew the mountains reflected in the water. "That's a rare gift." He set up a small art station for me on the wraparound porch, complete with an easel and a box of supplies that he refilled every summer. Sometimes he'd sit with me for hours in comfortable silence while I painted, offering gentle encouragement. "Your art will take you places, little one. Don't let anyone convince you it's not valuable." When I announced during my sophomore year of college that I was switching from pre-med to fine arts, Grandpa and Grandma were my only supporters. My father, Robert Harper, a successful orthopedic surgeon, made his disappointment crystal clear. "Artists don't build stable lives, Madison. You're throwing away your future." My mother, Patricia, echoed every word he said, as she always did. "We're just concerned about your financial security, honey. Art is a nice hobby, but it's not a career." The summer after my junior year, both grandparents passed away within 2 months of each other. Grandpa suffered a massive heart attack while tending his garden. Grandma followed him just 8 weeks later, dying peacefully in her sleep. The grief nearly destroyed our family, but they'd made sure their beloved lake property would continue bringing us together. They left it to my parents with explicit instructions in their will. This property exists to nurture creativity, connection, and love. May it always be a place where every Harper feels valued and welcome. My parents honored the gathering tradition, but something fundamental changed. The spontaneous joy was replaced with scheduled activities. The casual atmosphere became formal dinner parties. Guest lists expanded beyond family to include Dad's medical colleagues and Mom's country club friends. What had been a celebration of family became a showcase of success. And I was the one family member who didn't fit the image they wanted to. Project. The first exclusion happened 3 years ago. I'll never forget that text because I screenshot it, thinking there had to be some mistake. "Hi, sweetheart. We're scaling back this year. Just immediate family. Space is tight. Have a wonderful summer." I was hurt, but tried to rationalize it. Maybe they really were keeping it small. Maybe I was being too sensitive. That illusion shattered when Emma posted photos from the intimate gathering. 43 people sprawled across the property, including several family friends I barely knew. When I gently asked Emma about it later, she got defensive. Mom and Dad thought you'd be too busy with your art shows and gallery stuff. You know how you get absorbed in your work. Too busy. Too absorbed. Too focused on my hobby. Each of my siblings had found their place in the family hierarchy. Jake, the oldest at 38, followed Dad into medicine and lived just 10 minutes from our parents with his wife Sarah and their twin boys. He was the golden child who could do no wrong. Emma, 36, married a corporate lawyer and became the perfect doctor's wife, hosting charity luncheons and organizing fundraisers. She was everything Mom had hoped I'd become. The twins, Tyler and Trevor, both 34, went into finance together and bought houses on the same street. Their wives were best friends, their kids were playmates, and they represented the family unity our parents craved. Hannah, 30, became a pediatric nurse, respectable, stable, safely within the medical field. She married her college boyfriend, also a nurse, and they just announced their first pregnancy. And then there was Chloe, the baby at 28, who became an elementary school teacher. She married an accountant and lived what our parents considered the ideal modest, traditional lifestyle. Finally, there was me, single at 32, no children, running an art studio instead of having a real career. The family disappointment. Year 2 of Exclusions. The text was almost identical. Sorry, honey, we're keeping it really small this year. Maybe next summer when we have more space. This time, social media revealed 67 people had attended, including Mom's book club and several neighbors. The photos showed elaborate themed dinners, professional catering, even a hired photographer to document the small family gathering. I cried that night, alone in my studio apartment, surrounded by paintings that had won awards and commissions that paid my bills. None of it mattered to the people whose approval I'd spent my entire life seeking. The third year. This year, I thought I was prepared. I thought I'd built up enough emotional armor to handle the rejection. I was wrong. 127 confirmed guests. I stared at Tyler's Instagram post until the numbers blurred through my tears. Not 108 like I mentioned earlier. I was so shocked I'd miscounted. 127 people. I zoomed in on the printed itinerary, my hands shaking as I made out names. All 6 of my siblings, their spouses, their children. I could see cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, family friends from 3 states away, even Dad's former medical partners who'd retired to Florida. Everyone but me. I immediately called Tyler. Hey, that's quite a guest list for this weekend. Looks amazing. Yeah, his excitement was infectious. Mom and Dad really went all out this year. It's going to be epic. Dad even rented 3 additional cabins around the lake to fit everyone. 3 additional cabins. The no space excuse wasn't just a lie. It was a deliberate insult. How do you know the exact number? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Dad's been stressing about logistics for months. Had to hire an event coordinator. And everything. Mom keeps joking that it's bigger than some weddings. An event coordinator. For a family gathering I wasn't even told was happening. That night, I drove to the overlook above the city and screamed until my throat was raw. I screamed for every dismissive comment about my art phase. I screamed for every family photo where I was positioned at the edge, easily cropped out later. I screamed for every achievement of mine that was met with polite silence, while my siblings' smallest accomplishments were celebrated. But most of all, I screamed for the little girl who used to paint on Grandpa's porch, believing her family would always have space for her dreams. When I finally stopped screaming, something crystallized in the silence. I was done begging for crumbs from people who would never see my worth. I was done making myself smaller to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting my parents or posting angry rants on social media, I called my best friend and business partner, Riley. We'd met in art school 10 years ago, and she'd become more than a friend. She was the sister who actually chose to be in my life. They did it again. I said when she answered, my voice hollow, "Oh, Madison." Her voice was soft with understanding. The retreat? 127 people, Riley. They rented 3 extra cabins. They hired an event coordinator. The silence stretched between us before Riley spoke again, her voice fierce with protective anger. "You know what? Screw them. You're going to create something so incredible, so meaningful, that they'll realize what they've been missing." That's when the idea began to form. Not revenge, something better, creation. "What if," I said slowly, "I organized my own retreat? The same weekend. Not to compete, but to celebrate the community I've actually built." "Madison," Riley's voice was electric with excitement, "that's brilliant. Think about all the amazing people in your life, artists, writers, musicians, designers, people who actually value creativity and authenticity." The more we talked, the more the vision crystallized. This wouldn't be about proving anything to my family. This would be about honoring the community that has supported me, the friendships that have sustained me, and the creative spirit that Grandpa Will had nurtured in me all those years ago. I spent the next morning researching properties around Hidden Cove Lake. If my family could rent additional spaces, so could I. That's when I found it, Serenity Point Estate, a stunning modern property just 12 minutes from my family's traditional spot. The listing photos took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, an artist studio with perfect natural light, outdoor spaces designed for gathering and connection, and a dock that stretched far into the crystal-clear water. The rental cost made me wince. It would wipe out most of my savings. But something Grandpa Will used to say echoed in my mind. Sometimes you have to invest in your own worth before others will see it. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking this sounds expensive and risky. Hit that like button if you've ever had to make a leap of faith to prove your worth to yourself, not to others. I called the property manager and booked it for the exact same dates as my family's retreat. Then I sat down to create the guest list. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled. Creating the guest list felt like meditation. Each name I wrote down represented someone who had celebrated my successes, supported me through challenges, or simply made space for me in their life without conditions. Riley was first, obviously. Then Marcus, my former professor who'd become a mentor and friend. He'd flown in from Chicago for my gallery openings and always bought pieces to support emerging artists. I added Sophie, a writer whose book covers I designed and who become a dear friend. David and James, a couple who collected my paintings and had introduced me to 3 major clients. Lisa, a ceramics artist whose work I'd featured in a group show I'd curated. The list grew. Fellow artists from my studio collective, clients who'd become friends, college friends who'd stayed in touch, neighbors who'd supported my career from the beginning. People who knew my work, celebrated my achievements, and valued my perspective. After some debate, I decided to invite Hannah and Chloe. They were the 2 siblings who'd occasionally shown interest in my art and seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the family dynamics. I wrote personal notes explaining that I was hosting a creative retreat and would love to have them join me. Hannah declined politely, saying she couldn't miss the family event. But Chloe surprised me. She called instead of texting back. "Madison, I'm so sorry about the retreat situation. I've noticed the pattern too, and it's not fair." "You don't have to apologize for them, Chloe." "Actually, I do. We all do. We've let it happen for 3 years." She paused. "Your retreat sounds amazing. More my speed than Dad's formal networking thing. Can I really come?" "Of course. I'd love to have you." 2 weeks before the retreat, I had confirmed 24 guests. I created a beautiful website showcasing the property and the planned activities. Sunrise yoga on the deck, Collaborative art sessions in the studio, evening storytelling circles by the fire pit, boat trips to hidden coves around the lake. I design. Welcome packages with locally made soaps, small pieces of art from regional artists, leather-bound journals, and handwritten notes thanking each person for being part of my creative community. The night before guests arrived, I drove up to Serenity. Point stayed alone. Walking through the empty house, arranging welcome gifts, and setting up the studio space. I felt something I hadn't experienced in relation to my family for years. Peace. This space would be filled with people who chose to be there, who valued what I brought to their lives, who celebrated authenticity over appearances. For once, I wasn't the outsider looking in. I was the creator, building something beautiful from love instead of obligation. The first guest arrived at 11 a.m. sharp, Marcus, pulling up in his vintage Volvo with a trunk full of art supplies he brought to share. His reaction to the property validated every dollar I'd spent. "Madison, this is extraordinary," he said, taking in the lake view through the wall of windows. "You've created something special here." Throughout the morning, guests trickled in. Each arrival brought genuine joy, hugs that lasted, compliments. On the space, excitement about the week ahead. Sophie brought signed copies of her latest novel for everyone. David and James surprised me with a professionally edited video they made about my artistic journey, planning to show it during our final evening celebration. The energy in the house built with each arrival. This wasn't a formal networking event or a showcase of achievements. It was a gathering of creative souls who understood that the most valuable currency isn't money or status. It's authentic connection and mutual support. Chloe arrived just before lunch, and her face lit up as she walked through the house. "Madison, this is incredible. I can't remember the last time I felt this relaxed just walking into a space." "That's because everyone here actually wants to be here," I said, surprising myself with the emotional truth of the statement. Our first lunch was served on the deck overlooking the lake. Conversations flowed naturally, someone asking about a painting technique led to Sophie sharing how visual art influenced her writing style, which sparked David to talk about how collecting art had deepened his appreciation for creativity in his corporate consulting work. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself forgetting about my family's gathering happening just minutes away. This space was full of laughter, genuine interest in each other's work, and the kind of creative energy that feeds the soul. That evening, as we sat around the fire pit sharing stories and watching stars reflect on the water, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Mom's asking why Chloe isn't here. Apparently, she said she had other plans." I showed the text to Chloe, who laughed. "Other plans," she repeated. "The best plans I've made in years." The second day of the retreat brought an unexpected visitor. I was leading a watercolor session on the deck when a car pulled into the driveway. My heart stopped when I recognized the driver, my great-aunt Margaret, Grandpa Will's older sister. At 86, Aunt Margaret was the family matriarch, respected by everyone and feared by most. She'd been a successful gallery owner in New York for 40 years before retiring to Vermont. She was also the only person in my extended family who'd ever bought one of my paintings, not out of obligation, but because she genuinely loved it. "Aunt Margaret," I called out, rushing to help her out of her car. "What are you doing here?" She adjusted her signature red glasses and surveyed the property with an appraiser's eye. "I saw photos of this gathering on that Instagram thing. Recognized the lake, of course. Looked more interesting than the circus your parents are running up the road." Several of my guests had stopped their art projects to watch this unexpected arrival. Aunt Margaret had that effect on people. Her presence commanded attention. "I hope I'm not intruding," she continued, though her tone suggested she didn't much care if she was. "I was supposed to be at your parents' event, but I decided I'd rather see what you've created here." That evening, after most guests had retired to their rooms, Aunt Margaret and I sat on the dock, sharing a bottle of wine she brought from her private collection. The lake was perfectly still, reflecting the full moon like a mirror. "Your grandparents will be proud of you," she said suddenly. Not just of this weekend, but of staying true to yourself despite your parents' disapproval. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being too stubborn, I admitted. Maybe I should have tried harder to fit into their expectations. Aunt Margaret turned too. Look at me directly. Madison, I watched your father and mother systematically exclude you from family events for 3 years. I watched them diminish your achievements while celebrating your siblings' smallest accomplishments. That's not about you being difficult. That's about them being unable to value what they don't understand. Her words hit me like a physical blow. Someone else had seen it. Someone else had noticed the pattern. Will and Sarah saw it too, she continued. They were heartbroken by how Robert and Patricia treated your artistic gifts. They left you something in their will, something your parents have been holding on to. I stared at her. What do you mean? There's a letter, Madison, and a small inheritance specifically designated for your artistic pursuits. Your parents have had it for 3 years, but they haven't given it to you because they hoped you'd come to your senses about your career choice. The revelation shattered something inside me. Not only had my parents excluded and dismissed me, but they've been withholding something my grandparents had specifically intended for me. What happened next changed everything between me and my family. If you've ever had to stand up to people who were supposed to protect you, make sure you're subscribed because this part gets intense. The next morning, Aunt Margaret and I drove to my family's property. She insisted on coming with me, saying she'd been wanting to have words with my parents for quite some time. The scene at Hidden Cove was exactly what I'd expected. A massive, formal gathering that looked more like a corporate retreat than a family reunion. Catering tents, professional photographers, and dozens of people I didn't recognize milling around in expensive casual wear. I found my parents near the main house, holding court with a group of Dad's former colleagues. Mom was wearing an outfit that probably cost more than most people spend on rent, and Dad was in his element, playing the successful patriarch role. Madison. Mom's surprise was genuine, quickly followed by something that looked like panic. What are you doing here? We need to talk, I said simply. All of us, now. Dad glanced around at his audience, clearly uncomfortable with the interruption to his performance. This really isn't the time or place. Actually, Aunt Margaret stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of 8 decades. This is exactly the time and place. Hello, Robert, Patricia. The crowd around my parents seemed to sense drama and began drifting away. My siblings noticed the commotion and started gathering around us. Jake looked confused. Emma appeared mortified. And Tyler had his phone out, probably documenting everything for social media. We need to discuss the letter and inheritance from Will and Sarah, Aunt Margaret announced without preamble. The ones you've been withholding from Madison for 3 years. The color drained from Mom's face. Dad's jaw tightened in the way it did when he was cornered. That's private family business, he stammered. No, I said, finding my voice. Withholding something that was specifically left to me is theft. Excluding me from family events while lying about the reasons is emotional abuse. And I'm done accepting either. The crowd of extended family and friends was now openly staring. Emma looked like she wanted to disappear, while Hannah and Tyler seemed genuinely shocked by what they were hearing. Madison, please, Mom whispered. Glancing around at the audience, can we discuss this privately? I've tried private discussions for 3 years, I replied. Every time, you dismissed my feelings, minimized your actions, and continued the same patterns. So no, we're discussing this here, in front of everyone, because apparently that's the only way to get your attention. What happened next will stay with me forever. Dad, faced with the public scrutiny and Aunt Margaret's unwavering stare, finally cracked. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. Margaret, if you're going to make a scene, let's get this over with. He disappeared into the house and returned 5 minutes later with an envelope that had clearly been opened and resealed multiple times. My name was written on the front, in Grandpa Will's careful handwriting. We were waiting for the right time, Mom said weakly. We thought if you saw how difficult the art world was, you reconsider your choices. I took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter dated 2 weeks before Grandpa's death, along with documentation for a trust fund I'd never known existed. "My dearest Madison," the letter began, and I could hear Grandpa's voice as if he was standing beside me. "If you're reading this, it means your old grandpa has finally gone to join your grandma Sarah in whatever adventure comes next. I want you to know how proud I am of the artist you've become. Your talent was evident from those first sketches you made on our porch, but your courage to pursue your gifts despite opposition has impressed me more than you'll ever know. Your parents love you, but they don't understand that success comes in many forms. They measure worth in salary figures and social status. You measure it in beauty created, emotions expressed, and connections forged through your art. Your way is harder, but it's also more honest. I've set aside money specifically for your artistic pursuits, not because I think you need charity, but because I believe great artists deserve support, especially when they're brave enough to create something new in this world. Use this money to take risks, to create boldly, to travel and see how other artists live and work. Most importantly, use it to know that at least one person in this family has always believed in exactly who you are. The lake property will continue, bringing our family together, but I suspect you'll create your own gatherings too, ones filled with the people who appreciate your gifts. Both kinds of family are important. Keep painting, my dear girl. The world needs your particular way of seeing. All my love, Grandpa Will. P.S. Don't let anyone convince you that art isn't a real career. Some of the most real things in this world exist only because artists dared to create them. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. The trust fund was substantial, enough to buy my own studio space, travel to artist residencies, or simply have the security to take creative risks without worrying about paying rent. But more than the money was the validation. Grandpa had seen my struggles with the family. He'd understood what I was facing, and he tried to help. The silence after I finished reading stretched uncomfortably long. Around us, the elaborate family gathering continued, but our small group had become an island of tension in the festivities. 3 years, I said finally, looking directly at my parents. You've had this for 3 years. Madison, we can explain, Mom started. No, my voice was steadier than I felt. You've had 3 years to explain. Instead, you chose to exclude me from family events, dismiss my career, and withhold something that was meant to support the very path you claimed to disapprove of. Jake stepped forward, his face pale. Mom, Dad, is this true? You've been keeping this from Madison? It's complicated, Dad said, but his usual authority was gone. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by his own actions. It's not complicated at all, Aunt Margaret interjected. It's simple. You disapproved of Madison's choices, so you decided to punish her for them. You excluded a successful, talented woman from her own family because she didn't fit your narrow definition of success. Emma was crying now, and Hannah looked sick. Tyler had put his phone away and was staring at our parents like he was seeing them for the first time. All these years, Chloe said quietly, I thought Madison was just too busy to come to the retreats. I thought she was distancing herself from us. That's what we wanted you to think, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. It was easier than admitting you were being excluded. But why? Hannah asked, looking genuinely confused. Madison, you're successful. You're talented. You've won awards. You have clients all over the country. Why would they exclude you? Because none of that matters to them, I replied. Because I didn't become a doctor or marry one. Because I chose creativity over security, authenticity over appearances. Because I remind them that there are other ways to measure a successful life. Dad finally found his voice again, but it came out as a whisper. We thought if you struggled a little, you'd see that we were right about your career choice. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. My own father had hoped I would fail, had actively worked to undermine my confidence and success, all to prove a point about his own values. "So you withheld money that could have helped me build my career," I said slowly, hoping that I'd struggle enough to give up on my dreams and come crawling back to your definition of success. He couldn't meet my eyes. "That's not love," I continued. "That's manipulation. That's control. That's emotional abuse disguised as concern." The family gathering around us had essentially stopped. Extended relatives and family friends were openly watching our confrontation, some with concern, others with the fascination people have for family drama that isn't their own. "I think," Aunt Margaret said with the authority of someone who'd lived through decades of family dynamics, "it's time for some honesty about what's been happening here." She turned to address the broader gathering, her voice carrying clearly across the property. "For those who don't know, Madison here is an award-winning artist who runs a successful design studio. She's been excluded from these family retreats for 3 years because her parents disapprove of her career choice." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several people I didn't recognize looked shocked, while others seemed to be reevaluating everything they thought they knew about our family dynamics. "Meanwhile," Aunt Margaret continued, "she's been hosting her own retreat this weekend at Serenity Point Estate, celebrating the community of artists, writers, and creative professionals who actually value her contributions to the world." I felt a surge of panic. I hadn't intended for this to become public knowledge. But Aunt Margaret continued with the confidence of someone who decided the time for secrets was over. "Will and Sarah Harper left their granddaughter a letter and a trust fund to support her artistic career. Her parents have been withholding both for 3 years, hoping she'd abandon her dreams and conform to their expectations." The silence was deafening. I could see family members looking at each other, processing this information. Some looked angry on my behalf. Others appeared uncomfortable with the public airing of family business. Emma stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Madison, I'm so sorry. I didn't know about the letter or the money. I thought Mom and Dad were just worried about your stability." "They were worried about their image," I replied, but without malice. "They were worried about having a daughter who didn't fit their definition of success." Jake moved closer to me, and for the first time in years, I saw the brother I'd grown up with, rather than the doctor who'd inherited our father's expectations. "What can we do to fix this?" he asked quietly. I looked around at my siblings, some genuinely shocked, others defensive, all of them processing the revelation that our family wasn't what they thought it was. "You can start by acknowledging that this happened," I said. "You can stop making excuses for behavior that hurt me for years. And you can decide whether you want relationships with me based on who I actually am, not who you think I should be." Then I turned to my parents, who were standing frozen in the wreckage of their carefully constructed family image. "As for you, too," I said, my voice steady despite the emotional earthquake happening inside me, "I'm done seeking your approval. I'm done trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. I'm done accepting crumbs of affection while you pour yourselves into children who chose paths you approved of." What happened next surprised everyone, including me. Instead of anger or demands for apologies, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The truth was finally out, the secret was exposed, and I no longer had to carry the weight of their disapproval alone. "I want you all to know something," I said, addressing both my family and the wider gathering. "This weekend I've been surrounded by people who celebrate my successes, who support my dreams, and who make space for me in their lives without conditions. I've remembered what it feels like to be valued for exactly who I am." I paused, looking at each of my siblings in turn. "You're all welcome in that space if you choose to see me clearly. But I won't be begging for inclusion anymore. I won't be making myself smaller to fit into spaces that were never designed for me." Turning to my parents, I felt a sadness that ran deeper than anger. "You raised 6 children, but you only learned to love the ones who met your expectations. That's your loss, not mine." I've built a life filled with people who understand that love isn't conditional on career choices or life paths. Dad opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. The money Grandpa left me, I'll be using it exactly as he intended, to take creative risks, to support other artists, and to build something beautiful in this world. Not to prove anything to you, but to honor his belief in what art can accomplish. I looked around at the elaborate gathering, the catering, the photographers, the perfectly orchestrated showcase of family success. This isn't what Grandpa and Grandma envisioned when they bought this property. They wanted a place where creativity was celebrated, where every family member felt valued, where connection mattered more than appearance. Next weekend, I announced, surprising myself with the decision, I'm hosting an open studio event at my retreat property. Anyone who wants to see my work, meet my creative community, and understand what I've built is welcome. Not to prove my worth. I already know my worth, but to share the joy I found in choosing authenticity over approval. The crowd was silent, processing everything they'd witnessed. My siblings looked shell-shocked. My parents appeared to be in some form of denial, and the extended family members seemed unsure whether to applaud or slip quietly away. Aunt Margaret squeezed my arm. Your grandparents would be so proud, she whispered Dot as I walked away from the family gathering. My head held high for the first time in years. I heard footsteps behind me. Chloe, Hannah, and surprisingly, Jake were following. Madison, wait, Jake called. Can we come back to your retreat? I want to understand what we've been missing. I turned to face my siblings. Not all of them, but the ones who seemed ready to see me clearly. Of course, I said. But come as yourselves, not as representatives of Mom and Dad's expectations. Come ready to listen, to learn, and to acknowledge what's been happening. The rest of that afternoon at my retreat property was unlike anything I'd experienced with my family before. Jake, Hannah, and Chloe arrived tentatively, almost shyly, like they were entering a world they'd never known existed. My creative community welcomed them with the same warmth they'd shown every other guest. Sophie immediately engaged Jake in a conversation about how storytelling techniques could be applied to patient communication. Marcus showed Hannah how visual art could be therapeutic for children, something that lit up her eyes as a pediatric nurse. David and James, learning that Chloe taught elementary school, spent an hour discussing how arts education could be integrated into traditional curricula. For the first time, my siblings saw me in my element, not as the family disappointment, but as a respected professional surrounded by people who value creativity and authentic connection. They watched me lead a collaborative mural project, facilitate meaningful discussions about art and life, and create space for everyone to contribute their unique perspectives. That evening, as we sat around the fire pit, Jake cleared his throat. Awkwardly, Madison, I owe you an apology. We all do. I don't think I really understood what you were dealing with until today. I knew something felt off about the family dynamics, Hannah admitted, staring into the flames. But I convinced myself it was just personality differences. I didn't want to see that it was actually exclusion. Chloe was quiet for a long moment before speaking. I think I stayed quiet because I was afraid that if I defended you too strongly, I might become the next target. That's cowardly, and I'm sorry. Their honesty meant more to me than years of forced family gatherings ever could have. These weren't perfect apologies or instant fixes to decades of dysfunction, but they were real acknowledgments of harm done and relationships that needed repair. I don't need you to fix our parents, I told them. I need you to decide what kind of relationships we want to have with each other, independent of their approval or disapproval. Over the next 2 days, something beautiful began to emerge. My siblings started sharing their own struggles with our parents' rigid expectations. Jake revealed that he'd always wanted to work in pediatric medicine, but had been pressured into the more prestigious orthopedic surgery track. Hannah admitted she'd chosen nursing partly because it was medical enough to satisfy Dad, but different enough to maintain some independence. Even Chloe confessed that she'd become a teacher despite our parents' subtle disappointment that she hadn't chosen something more ambitious. Each of us, in our own way, had felt the weight of expectations that didn't quite fit who we really were. The difference, Chloe observed, is that you had the courage to choose your authentic path anyway, and we took the safer route of compliance. Word of what had happened at the family gathering spread quickly through our extended family network. Over the next week, I received calls and messages from cousins, aunts, and family friends I hadn't heard from in years. Some reached out to express shock at how I'd been treated. Others shared their own stories of feeling excluded or dismissed by family members who couldn't accept their choices. A few admitted they'd known something was wrong, but hadn't felt comfortable speaking up. My cousin, Rebecca from Denver, called to tell me she'd always wondered why I stopped attending family events. "I thought you'd just gotten too successful and busy for us," she said. "I had no idea you were being deliberately excluded. That's not the family I thought we were." But the most surprising call came from my Uncle Tom, Dad's younger brother, who lived in Oregon with his husband of 15 years. "Madison," he said, "what happened at the lake has me thinking about my own relationship with your parents. Robert and Patricia have never fully accepted my marriage, and I've been making excuses for them for years." The revelation started conversations throughout our extended family about acceptance, conditional love, and the difference between disagreeing with someone's choices and excluding them from your life. 3 weeks after the retreat, Emma called me. Her voice was shaky, and she'd clearly been crying. "Madison, I need to tell you something. After what happened at the lake, I started paying attention to how Mom and Dad talk about you when you're not around. Really paying attention." She paused, struggling with the words. "It's worse than I realized. They don't just disapprove of your career, they actively hope you'll fail, so you'll come back to them admitting they were right." The confirmation of what I'd suspected hurt, but it also validated years of feeling like I was fighting an invisible battle. I confronted them about it, Emma continued. I told them their behavior was unacceptable and that they needed to make real changes if they wanted relationships with their children. Mom cried and said she didn't realize how bad it had gotten. Dad got defensive and angry. "How did you handle that?" I asked. I told them that loving someone means supporting their authentic happiness, not demanding they conform to your vision of their life. I said that if they couldn't learn to celebrate you for who you are, they were going to lose more than one daughter. Emma's courage in confronting our parents directly moved me deeply. For years, I'd felt like I was fighting alone. Now, allies were emerging from unexpected places. 6 months after the retreat, one organized the largest gallery showing of my career. Using part of Grandpa's inheritance, I rented a beautiful space in downtown San Francisco and curated an exhibition called Hidden Coves, paintings and mixed media pieces inspired by the lake that had been such a central part of my childhood. The centerpiece was a massive canvas titled The Table, depicting an enormous dining table set for dozens of people, with one conspicuously empty chair. The piece had taken me 3 months to complete, working through layers of pain, exclusion, hope, and ultimately acceptance. I sent invitations to my entire family, including my parents. I didn't expect them all to come, but I wanted them to have the choice to see my work in a professional context, to understand what I'd built with my life. The opening night exceeded every expectation. The gallery was packed with collectors, fellow artists, clients, and friends. Local art critics attended, and several pieces sold within the first hour. But more importantly, the space was filled with genuine celebration of creativity and authentic connection. Hannah and Chloe arrived early, bringing their partners and helping me greet guests. Jake came with his wife Sarah and their 2 boys, who were fascinated by the paintings and asked dozens of questions about technique and inspiration. Tyler and Trevor surprised me by showing up together, looking genuinely impressed by the professional presentation and the quality of work on display. "I had no idea," Tyler kept saying. "I mean, I knew you were talented, but this is This is real success. Even Emma came, though she arrived late and seemed nervous about being there. She spent a long time standing in front of the table. And when she finally found me in the crowd, her eyes were red with tears. "I see it now," she said quietly. "I see what we did to you, and I see what you built despite us." The most emotional moment came when Great Aunt Margaret arrived, leaning on her walking cane, but determined to support her great-niece's triumph. She surveyed the gallery with the eye of a professional, nodding approvingly at the presentation and the caliber of work. "Your grandfather would weep with pride," she told me, squeezing my hand. "You've honored his faith in you." As the evening progressed, I noticed my parents hadn't arrived. Part of me wasn't surprised. Attending would have required them to acknowledge the success of the path they'd tried so hard to discourage. But their absence felt different this time. Not like a rejection of me, but like their choice to remain close to growth and understanding. Near the end of the evening, as I was thanking guests and beginning to clean up, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Madison?" I turned to find my father standing hesitantly near the entrance, still in his work clothes, like he'd made a last-minute decision to come. He looked around the gallery, taking in the crowd, the sold stickers on several pieces, the obvious success of the event. "Dad." I wasn't sure what else to say. He approached slowly, stopping in front of the table. He stood there for several minutes, studying the empty chair, understanding dawning on his face. "This is about us," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "It's about family," I replied. "About making space for people you love, even when they're different from what you expected." My father stood before that painting for nearly 10 minutes while the gallery emptied around us. I watched him process not just the artistic technique, but the emotional truth it represented. The empty chair wasn't accusatory. It was simply honest. "I don't understand art," he said finally, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I never have. When you were little, drawing on Dad's porch, I thought it was just a phase, something you'd outgrow when you discovered more practical interests." I waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. "When you chose art school over pre-med, I was terrified." Not angry, terrified. "I grew up poor, Madison. My father worked 3 jobs to keep us housed and fed. Security, stability, predictable income. Those weren't just preferences for me. They were survival." He turned away from the painting to look at me directly. "I couldn't understand how you could choose uncertainty over safety. Every choice you made felt like you were walking toward a cliff I couldn't protect you from. So you decided to push me off the cliff yourself?" I asked, but without malice. I was genuinely trying to understand. "I thought if you struggled early, you changed course before it was too late to build a stable career. I thought I was protecting you from failure." He gestured around the gallery. "I was wrong." It wasn't a complete apology, but it was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. For the first time, I could see my father as a human being shaped by his own fears rather than just the authority figure who'd never understood me. "Dad, I needed you to believe in me," I said gently. "I needed you to trust that I could navigate the uncertainty because I loved what I was doing. Instead, you became another obstacle I had to overcome." He nodded slowly, tears forming in his eyes. "I see that now. And I see what you've accomplished, not just financially, but this." He gestured to where guests had been gathered, to the evidence of community and respect I built. "You've created something meaningful. I want you in my life," I told him. "But I need you to see me clearly. I need you to celebrate who I am, not mourn who you thought I should be." "Can you teach me?" he asked, the question so unexpected it took my breath away. "Can you help me understand your world?" For the first time in years, I saw a path forward that didn't require me to choose between family and authenticity. The following summer, something unprecedented happened. Instead of organizing separate retreats, we created something new together, using Grandpa's property as the base. We hosted the first annual Creative Co's Gathering, a week-long event that celebrated both family connection and creative expression. My parents funded it, but I designed the programming. My siblings helped with logistics, and my creative community provided workshops and activities. The old formal networking atmosphere was replaced with collaborative art projects, storytelling circles, music sessions, and meaningful conversations about pursuing authentic paths in life. Children learned alongside adults. Traditional career success was celebrated equally with creative achievements. My father surprised everyone by participating in a watercolor workshop I led, producing a shaky but sincere painting of the lake at sunset. "It's terrible," he announced to the group, "but I'm beginning to understand why someone would want to spend their life making beautiful things." My mother, initially resistant to the changes, found herself deeply engaged in a creative writing workshop led by Sophie. She wrote and shared a piece about her own abandoned dreams with journalism, connecting her story to the importance of supporting our children's authentic paths. The retreat became an annual tradition, growing each year as word spread about this unique family gathering that prioritized acceptance and creativity alongside connection. Cousins brought their artistic friends, family friends brought their creative family members, and the event evolved into something Grandpa Will would have recognized and loved. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in my day-to-day relationship with my parents. Dad started attending my gallery openings, not out of obligation, but with genuine curiosity about my work. He began commissioning pieces for his medical office, proudly telling patients about his daughter, the artist. Mom surprised me by taking art classes herself, discovering a love for pottery that she'd never explored. We started having monthly coffee dates where she'd show me her latest ceramic pieces, and I'd share what I was working on in my studio. The relationship wasn't perfect. Decades of patterns don't disappear overnight. But it was real, built on mutual respect rather than conditional approval. 2 years after that first retreat, I received news that changed everything once again. Great-Aunt Margaret, at 88, had decided to sell her Vermont property and move to assisted living. But first, she had something she wanted to give me. "Your grandfather's art supplies," she said when I visited her, "will save every sketchbook you ever filled at the lake, every painting you made on that old porch. I've been keeping them all these years, waiting for the right moment." She led me to a room I'd never seen, filled with carefully preserved artwork spanning my childhood and teenage years. Sketchbooks full of lake scenes, pressed flowers turned into compositions, even my early attempt at painting the mountains reflected in water. "He was documenting your artistic journey before you even knew you were on one," Margaret explained. "He believed you were destined for something special, and he wanted proof of how far you'd come." Among the preserved pieces was a letter I'd never seen, written by Grandpa Will to his future self and sealed with instructions to open it only after I'd achieved professional recognition as an artist. "My future self," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means Madison has proven what I always knew, that real artists can't be discouraged from their path. They can only be supported or delayed. I hope you live to see her success. I hope you got to watch her create community around her gifts. Most of all, I hope our family learned to see what I saw in that little girl drawing on our porch. Not just talent, but courage. The courage to see the world differently and the strength to share that vision despite opposition. If they haven't learned yet, don't give up on them. Sometimes love needs time to grow wise enough to accept what it doesn't understand." Madison, if you're reading this after I'm gone, know that every painting you create, every life you touch through your art, every moment you choose authenticity over approval, you're honoring not just your own gifts, but the faith of everyone who ever believed in those gifts. Keep painting, my dear girl. Keep creating spaces where others feel seen and valued. Keep building the world you want to live in, one brushstroke at a time. Reading Grandpa's final letter, surrounded by the visual record of my artistic journey, I understood something profound about the power of unconditional support and the legacy we create when we choose to see and celebrate each other's authentic Gifts. Today, 5 years after that devastating text about no space at the family retreat, I'm preparing for this year's Creative Codes gathering. The event has grown beyond anything I initially imagined, but its heart remains the same. Creating space for people to be authentically themselves while building meaningful connections. My studio is now housed in a beautiful converted warehouse. Space funded partially by Grandpa's inheritance and partially by the success that came from choosing courage over comfort. I employ 3 other artists, mentor emerging creatives, and run workshops for adults who want to reconnect with their creative spirits. The family dynamics continue to evolve. Emma and I have developed a real friendship, built on mutual respect, rather than sibling obligation. She started taking photography classes and discovered a talent for capturing authentic emotional moments, a skill that's actually enhanced her role as a corporate wife by making her events more warm and engaging. Jake made the career change he'd always dreamed of, transitioning to pediatric medicine despite Dad's initial disappointment. Watching you choose your authentic path gave me courage to choose mine, he told me. His work with sick children has brought him joy I never saw when he was following Dad's expectations. Hannah, Tyler, Trevor, and Chloe have all found ways to honor their own creativity within their chosen careers. Hannah uses art therapy with her young patients. The twins have started a financial literacy program that uses creative teaching methods, and Chloe has transformed her classroom into an arts-integrated learning environment. But perhaps the most surprising transformation has been in my parents. Dad now serves on the board of the local arts council, using his business connections to support emerging artists. Mom volunteers at the Children's Art Museum, finding joy in nurturing creativity in the next generation. They're not perfect, and our relationship isn't without occasional tension. But they've learned to celebrate my path rather than merely tolerate it, and they've discovered that having a daughter who builds community through creativity reflects well on them in ways they never expected. The empty chair from my painting, The Table, has been filled, not through my capitulation to their expectations, but through their growth toward acceptance and understanding. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like the family outcast, the one who doesn't quite fit, the one whose dreams seem too impractical or too different, I want you to know something important. Your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to understand your gifts. Your value isn't measured by their approval or diminished by their exclusion. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for others is to stop shrinking to fit into spaces that were never designed to hold all of who you are, creating your own space. Whether that's literally hosting your own gathering, figuratively building your own community, or simply internally choosing to value yourself, isn't selfish. It's necessary. It's how you honor the gifts you've been given and create room for others who need to see that it's possible to thrive while being authentically themselves. The retreat I created wasn't ultimately about proving anything to my family. It was about proving something to myself, that I could transform rejection into creation, exclusion into inclusion, hurt into healing, that I could build something beautiful from the raw materials of my own authentic experience. Your family, whether biological or chosen, should celebrate your successes, support your dreams, and make space for you to be exactly who you are. If they don't, that's information about them, not about you. Use that information wisely, but don't let it define your worth. Sometimes people need to see your success from a distance before they can appreciate it up close. Sometimes they need to witness your thriving without their approval before they realize their approval was never what made you valuable. And sometimes, sadly, they never get there, but that still doesn't diminish what you've built or who you've become. The most powerful response to being told there's no space for you is to create a space so beautiful, so welcoming, so full of genuine joy that others want to be included in what you've built. Not as revenge, but as revolution. A complete transformation of what family and belonging can look like. As I finish sharing this story with you, I'm sitting in the same lakefront, property where my grandparents first nurtured my artistic dreams. Tomorrow, 87 people will arrive for this year's Creative Codes gathering, artists and accountants, writers and engineers, teachers and doctors, all united by a commitment to authentic living and creative expression. Some of those people are my biological family members who've learned to celebrate differences instead of demanding conformity. Others are chosen family members who supported my journey from the beginning. All of them are here because they understand that creativity isn't just about making art. It's about making meaning, building community, and having the courage to live authentically in a world that often rewards conformity. The little girl who used to paint on Grandpa's porch would be amazed by what grew from those early sketches. But she wouldn't be surprised by the heart of it, the deep belief that everyone deserves to be seen, valued, and celebrated for exactly who they are. If this story has resonated with you, if you felt the sting of exclusion or the weight of disapproval from people whose love should have been unconditional, I want you to know this. Your authentic path matters. Your creative gifts, whether they're traditional art or innovative problem solving, whether they're expressed through career choices or parenting styles, or the way you show up for friends, those gifts are needed in this world. Don't wait for permission to honor them. Don't postpone your authentic life until others are ready to understand it. Create your own space, build your own community, and trust that when you're living authentically, you give others permission to do the same. The table I painted with the empty chair has been replaced in my studio with a new piece, a long, welcoming table with chairs of every size and style, representing the truth I've learned. There's always room at the table. When love is the foundation and authenticity is celebrated. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community of people who believe in the power of choosing courage over comfort, creation over competition, and authentic connection over conditional approval. If this video helped you see your own situation more clearly or gave you courage to honor your own authentic path, please share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Sometimes we all need reminding that we're not alone in feeling like we don't quite fit, and that not fitting might be exactly what the world needs from us. Until next time, keep creating, keep connecting, and keep believing in the beauty of your own authentic story.